Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into a really challenging situation that's emerged from allegations of financial fraud involving Ghazala Din and her family over in Coventry. The source material we have describes, well, potentially hundreds of victims, significant losses, often around, say, £5,000, paid in cash. It's quite a stark example of how systemic failures can impact people seeking justice. So, our central question today is this. When formal systems, like the police or action fraud, seem to result in no action, what's the best path for victims? Should they focus on trying to coordinate better within those official structures, or is it more effective to pursue, faster, decentralized, maybe victim-led actions to try and recover assets? I'll be arguing that despite the frustrations, focusing on improving coordination within the official legal structures is ultimately the necessary path.
And I'm going to come at it from a slightly different angle because the reality I think presented in this material, it really demonstrates a pretty complete failure of the formal system in this instance. People did make formal reports. It says right here they received no response back. So when you have alleged perpetrators who seem to be actively getting rid of assets, buying cars, jewelry, and the initial transactions were all in cash, making them hard to trace officially. Well, immediate collective action feels less like a choice and more like a practical necessity. Using intelligence gathered by others, like this brother that's been investigating, to quickly try and trace funds, pinpoint locations, like Bennett's Road or Sansway's Garden, that might be the only way to actually prevent a total loss.
Okay, but the legal process, even with its current let's call them profound shortcomings, it still remains the only really viable path for a verifiable resolution, for actual restitution down the line. The immediate goal, therefore, has to be about overcoming these administrative hurdles, right? It's about building critical mass. And the communication itself sort of hints at this path forward. Victims need to link all their reported cases together, specifically using those action fraud reference numbers. Now, this action is crucial because it potentially shifts the perception from dozens of maybe isolated incidents into something that meets the threshold for coordinated criminal investigation. That's how you get official recognition of the alleged fraud's true scale, affecting over 100 people, as mentioned. And frankly, that kind of scale is probably the only leverage strong enough to compel proper regional police intervention.
But that approach, while logical on paper, is just too slow. Speed is absolutely paramount here if the goal is actually recovery, not just, eventual justice years down the line. We're talking about allegations where people are actively buying cars, spending money now in real time. Relying on a system that, as we've established from the material, has demonstrably failed to act so far, well, it creates a kind of moral hazard, doesn't it? It almost signals to alleged fraudsters that if you keep transactions informal, cash-based, maybe below certain thresholds, you can essentially guarantee impunity because of bureaucratic friction and delays.
You raise a very compelling point about the speed of asset dispersal. I absolutely concede that. But we have to talk about the legal weight, the admissibility of this decentralized information. When the primary investment, let's take that specific £5,000 example, was apparently documented only in cash. The fundamental issue is the lack of rigorous, verifiable evidence, the kind courts recognize. So how does localized intelligence, maybe gathered by a private investigator or the victims themselves, noting, say, a new car purchase, how does that actually hold up legally if it wasn't obtained through formal judicial processes? I remain somewhat skeptical about its standalone value in a prosecution.
Okay, but I think that view potentially misunderstands the specific nature of this alleged fraud. If the whole scheme allegedly relied on informal trust in cash payments, precisely because perhaps it aimed to bypass formal banking structures, then collective intelligence isn't just supplementary. It becomes almost essential primary evidence. Think about it. We're talking about linking dozens potentially of detailed victim testimonies. Testimonies that might place Ghazala Din or her family at the exact time and place of a cash exchange. It's the sheer volume of this collective, consistent, and importantly, locally verified testimony that could potentially overcome the weakness of a single undocumented transaction. It gives the police specific, actionable intelligence, names, dates, places that bank records simply cannot provide in this scenario.
All right, let's accept for a moment that speed is vital. The question then becomes, does pursuing that speed aggressively, for instance, the idea floated in the communications to, quote, go down her mom's or son's yard, does that risk nullifying the potential for any long-term legal recovery? I mean, I have serious concerns that such direct victim action, however understandable the frustration, could end up prejudicing an eventual official prosecution. Police and prosecutors need untainted evidence. They need witnesses who haven't interfered, let's say. If victims attempt direct confrontation or evidence gathering outside official channels, a defense lawyer could later argue that the evidence chain was compromised, potentially damaging the whole case. Linking the official reports, however tedious it seems, provides a clear legal pathway for escalation without compromising the integrity of a potential future prosecution.
And that's the ultimate tension, isn't it? It's incredibly difficult. But without some form of practical pressure, justice risks remaining purely theoretical, while the alleged funds just evaporate. Look, I'm not advocating for abandoning the police entirely. Far from it. But it's about using the collected local intelligence, the confirmed locations, the real-time tracking of asset movements gathered by the community, using that intelligence to essentially force the police's hand. If the police are presented with a fully built victim-verified intelligence package, practically a map showing where the money might be going, they move from perhaps passive, unsuccessful casework based on limited initial reports to having concrete, actionable leads that become much harder for them to ignore without facing serious questions themselves.
Yeah, I think this discussion really does powerfully illuminate that difficult tension alleged victims face. They're caught between this desperate, understandable need for immediate, practical action, trying to trace assets, stop the bleeding, so to speak, and the long-term necessity of adhering to legal structures. Structures designed for justice, yes, but which can seem agonizingly slow and unresponsive, especially when dealing with this kind of alleged cash-based, localized fraud.
Exactly. And the material we've looked at today, it really highlights a critical gap, I think, in fraud remediation. Scalable law enforcement systems seem to struggle immensely with these kinds of localized, perhaps high-trust, low-documentation incidents, like this alleged Coventry scheme. So, ultimately, understanding both the potential procedural leverage you might gain by linking those action fraud numbers, as you argued, and acknowledging the practical realities and potential power of peer-to-peer intelligence gathering, well, considering both probably offers the most complete view of the very real challenges facing victims in this kind of situation.